Rome, from glory to ruin. How the greatest empire in history absolutely demolished itself. Rome built the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever seen. 3 continents, 1,000,000 miles of road, aqueducts so well engineered that some of them still work today. Honestly, for a bunch of people who thought the cure for a headache was strapping a dead mole to your forehead, they were doing pretty great. And then they ruined it. Not quickly, mind you. Not in some dramatic single moment of catastrophe. No, Rome ruined itself the way your uncle ruins Thanksgiving. Slowly, loudly, with tremendous confidence, and completely avoidably. Today we are going to chart the full spectacular arc of Rome's self-destruction. From the height of its golden glory all the way down to the moment a guy named Odoacer basically walked in, tapped the last emperor on the shoulder and said, "Yeah, we're done here." So buckle up, because this is going to be a beautiful disaster. Let's do some history. The Golden Age, or when Rome was actually good, at this the glory years. At its peak, Rome was, by every conceivable measure, the main character of planet Earth. Under the so-called 5 good emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, spanning roughly 96 to 180 AD, the empire hummed along like a well-oiled machine. Roads connected every corner of the known world. Trade flowed freely. The legal system was coherent. The army was disciplined. Philosophy was being written in marble palaces. This was, genuinely, Rome at full swagger. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, was out here writing Meditations, a personal journal of Stoic wisdom that people still read and annotate today, which is honestly impressive for a man who also had to manage approximately 400 miles of active frontier at all times. He was doing therapy homework while running the world. Respect. Trajan expanded the empire to its absolute maximum size. The whole Mediterranean, North Africa, chunks of the Middle East, Britain, Rome had it all. At its peak, roughly 70 million people lived under Roman rule. 1 in 4 humans on Earth was technically Roman. That is a staggering number that becomes even more staggering when you learn what happened next. Because after Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, Rome handed power to his son Commodus. And that is where our story takes a sharp, deeply entertaining turn toward catastrophe. The chaos begins. Or, please, someone take the keys. The imperial meltdown. Here is what you need to understand about the Roman emperor situation. The job had basically no reasonable HR process. There was no formal succession law, no interview panel, no probationary period. You were emperor because the previous emperor said so, or because the army liked you, or because you had stabbed enough of your rivals. It was a nightmare system that somehow held together for centuries on vibes and military discipline alone. Commodus arrived and immediately made clear he had absolutely no interest in governing. What he was interested in was gladiators, specifically being one. The emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, son of the great philosopher Marcus Aurelius, decided his true calling was to dress up as Hercules and fight in the Colosseum. He wandered the arena in a lion's skin, clubbing injured and maimed soldiers who had been tied together so he'd have an easier time. He billed the treasury 1,000,000 sesterces per appearance, which is the ancient equivalent of the government paying for your hobby. He also decided, with characteristic modesty, to rename the city of Rome after himself. August became Commodus. The Senate became the Commodian Fortunate Senate. The Roman people would henceforth be known as Commodiani. He wanted to rename every single month of the year after one of his own titles, because 12 of them just barely covered his ego. Historians describe this reign as the beginning of Rome's long descent. Commodus's own fitness coach eventually strangled him in his bath, which tells you everything you need to know about how well the whole Hercules thing was going over. After Commodus came what historians diplomatically call the crisis of the 3rd century, between 235 and 284 AD, which is a polite academic way of saying 50 years where Rome had 50 emperors and basically none of them made it out alive. The average reign during this period was roughly 1 year. You could get hired, fired, and murdered in the span of a single harvest season. The Praetorian Guard, the elite imperial bodyguard, had discovered they could simply auction the throne to the highest bidder, which they did openly in public, like a very grim yard sale. A man named Didius Julianus literally won the Roman Empire at auction. He was emperor for 66 days before being executed. Not a great return on investment. The economy collapses, or Rome discovers inflation the hard way. The financial spiral. While the emperors were busy losing their minds at each other, Rome's economy was doing its own quiet unraveling in the background. The empire ran largely on slave labor and the spoils of conquest, a system that worked magnificently as long as Rome kept conquering people. The moment expansion stopped, the whole economic logic started leaking. Silver coins, the lifeblood of Roman commerce, were steadily debased. Emperors, desperate for cash, kept reducing the actual silver content in the denarius. By the 3rd century, a coin that was supposed to be silver was about 5% silver and 95% wishful thinking. Predictably, inflation followed. Prices rose. Farmers struggled. The middle class, such as it was, quietly evaporated. Heavy taxation strangled the provinces trying to fund a military that was simultaneously too large to pay and too underfunded to function properly. It was an austerity spiral, Roman style, and nobody seemed to have a plan B. The supply of slaves dried up too, because the empire had largely run out of convenient new people to conquer. Without fresh labor and fresh loot flowing in, the whole economic engine started coughing and sputtering like a very old chariot on a very steep hill. The barbarians are knocking, or Rome opens the door itself, the barbarian problem now, about those barbarians. For centuries, Rome had managed its borders with a combination of military force, diplomacy, and the general understanding that crossing Rome was a very bad idea. That understanding began to erode alarmingly in the late 4th century, as Germanic tribes, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and everyone's favorite disaster bringers, the Huns, began pushing hard against Rome's northern and eastern frontiers. The Huns, arriving from the Central Asian steppe under Attila, were so terrifyingly effective at what they did that the Germanic tribes they displaced essentially sprinted into Roman territory just to get away from them, which is a remarkable compliment to Attila's personality. Rome, facing a manpower shortage and needing soldiers desperately, began accepting these very same Germanic tribes into the Roman army. They paid barbarians to defend the empire from other barbarians. This works about as well as you'd expect. In 410 AD, the Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome itself. The city that had not been touched by an enemy in 800 years, the Eternal City, the center of the known world, was looted for 3 days. The psychological shock across the empire was immense. St. Augustine, sitting in North Africa, reportedly could not believe the news. Nobody could. Rome wasn't supposed to fall. That was the whole point of Rome. But it did fall. Sort of. Technically, the eastern half, Constantinople, just kept right on going and would do so for another 1,000 years, which is enormously annoying for anyone trying to give Rome a clean ending. The western half, however, limped on in increasingly embarrassing fashion. The final act, or somebody please, turn off the lights, 476 AD and the end of everything. The last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was named Romulus Augustulus, which is both the most Roman name imaginable and history's most on-the-nose irony. The empire that began with a Romulus ended with a Romulus. He was around 15 years old, appointed by his father, controlled by nobody, and ruling over a territory that had shrunk to approximately Italy in a strong sense of nostalgia. In 476 AD, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer marched in, politely deposed the teenager, sent the imperial regalia back to Constantinople with a note essentially saying, "We won't be needing this anymore," and declared himself king of Italy. No dramatic battle, no final speech. The Western Roman Empire ended with the administrative equivalent of handing in your company laptop. Historians have counted over 200 different theories for why Rome fell. Political corruption, military overstretch, economic collapse, climate change, a devastating plague called the Antonine Plague, and then another one called the Plague of Cyprian, because apparently one civilization-disrupting pandemic wasn't enough. the loss of civic virtue, the rise of Christianity shifting focus from the state, lead pipes. Historians have genuinely blamed the lead pipes. The honest answer is all of them, layered on top of each other across 3 centuries, in a slow-motion catastrophe that no single generation felt the full weight of. Rome didn't fall in a day. It just gradually stopped being Rome. One compromised emperor, one debased coin, one unguarded border at a time. The epilogue. Or, wait, did Rome actually die? Here's the uncomfortable twist. Rome never really died. The Eastern Empire kept going until 1453. That's over 1,000 years after Romulus Augustulus handed in his badge. The Catholic Church absorbed Roman administrative structure so completely that it still uses Latin today. Every legal system in Western Europe descends from Roman law. You're reading this in an alphabet Rome gave you. Half the words in this script are Latin. The roads, the arches, the aqueducts, some of them are still standing. Rome built itself so deeply into the foundations of Western civilization that even its collapse couldn't finish it off. It just transformed, went underground, hid inside the institutions it had created and waited, crafty bastards, to the very end. Here's the revised ending. The final word, or Rome never really said goodbye, and that is how the greatest empire in human history. The civilization that conquered 3 continents, built roads that outlasted kingdoms, and gave the world its laws, its language, and its architectural ego, quietly handed in its toga and shuffled off into history, not slain by a worthy rival, not brought down by some unstoppable force of nature. Rome was undone by bad emperors, empty treasuries, lead pipes, 15-year-olds on thrones, and a German chieftain who couldn't even be bothered to call himself emperor. The audacity, the absolute audacity. But here's what keeps me up at night. Rome never truly died. It just shape-shifted. Hid inside the church, the legal codes, the alphabet you're reading right now. Every time you drive on a straight road, quote Latin, or watch a courtroom drama, you are living inside Rome's ghost. The empire fell. The idea? Completely unkillable. 2,000 years of glory, madness, genius, and spectacular self-destruction. And we've only scratched the surface. Because Rome isn't a story with an ending. It's a story that keeps going, through every civilization it touched, every language it shaped, every law it wrote. And that is one of the greatest stories ever told. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Drop a comment below. Tell me which Roman emperor you think was the most unhinged, because I guarantee your answer will start a war in the comment section. And honestly, Rome would have wanted it that way. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell. Because we've got empires to burn, histories to unpack, and disasters to make sense of. Every single week. The Romans built for eternity. The least you can do is hit subscribe.